Welcome to part 8 of Photon Networking with Unity. We'll be talking about server authority and making your game harder to hack. When the phrase server authority is used in game design, it essentially means that the server manages all the important information, such as health, how fast a player moves, perhaps how frequently they can use an attack, and anything you basically don't want the user to modify that could disrupt the game. And this video will be specifically covering health and how to prevent the player from modifying their health. So to begin, we'll actually have to make a script which will hold information about all the players, and this will be held on the server, hence server authority, as the server will be in charge of managing this information. Let's begin by opening up the game scene and add a new game object in your hierarchy. Rename it to player management, and it can be anywhere in the scene, it doesn't really matter. Go to your scripts folder. I'm going to make a new script. Also going to call it player management, and go ahead and open that script up. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a new class which will hold data about each player. So I'm going to go to the very bottom and add a new class with the name player stats, and it's going to be a public class. So public class player stats. I'm going to add a constructor which will take a Photon player and health. And this will be the initial health that is assigned when you first make a player stat. So now I need to add some variables. Let's do public read only Photon player. So what's going to happen is whenever you create this class, you're going to assign the Photon player that it belongs to, and that will not be changing, hence the read only. Now we need a public int for health, and since you will be changing the health, you'll want to leave that as mutable. So up in the constructor, very simple, we're just going to do Photon player equals Photon player, and health equals health. So make sure you have the capital version equals the lowercase version for both variables. Now I need to go back to my player management, add a couple variables up top. I'm going to make it a singleton. So public static player manager instance. I'm also going to have a Photon view on this script or game object. So I'm going to do private Photon view. And lastly, I need to make a list of all of the player stats. It's going to be private list of player stats type. And I'm just going to call it player stats equals new list player stats. Okay, so erase start and add private void awake, and like all our other singletons, instance equals this. Also at Photon view equals get component Photon view. Now we need to make a method to populate our player stats list. So go ahead and erase update and make a public method of void add player stats Photon player. So you're going to pass in a Photon player to this method, and it's going to create a new player stats class using that player. So the first thing we need to check is to make sure the player is not already in the player stats. So we're going to do int index equals player stats dot find index x equals greater than x.photonPlayer equals photonPlayer. So like we've talked about in the past with link, what this is going to do is going to find any entry where the photonPlayer variable, which is this one right here, matches the passed in photonPlayer. And if it does, index will return the index in the list where that entry is at. Otherwise, index will be -1 if nothing is found. And since you only want to add the player if they're not already in the list, I'm going to do if index equals -1, player stats dot add new player stats, so a new copy of the class. We're going to pass in photonPlayer into the constructor, and we'll say the initial health of 30. And no, you're not going crazy, my font color did just change. I have a syntax highlighting add-on and it got disabled, so I just turned it back on. So now we need to make a placeholder method. I'm going to call it modify help, and it does need to be public. So public void modify help, and we need to pass in photonPlayer and value, which would be how much health we're modifying. For now, go ahead and leave that empty and save your script. So now we need to populate our player stats list, and we're going to do that in player network. I have it open right here in this tab. If you don't, go ahead and find yours and open that script up. And we're going to do this in the RPC loaded game scene, but we need to add an extra parameter of type photonPlayer. And then we need to pass in the player, which is calling RPC loaded game scene. So we have one up here under non-master loaded game. So I'm going to pass in photon network.player. I'm just going to copy that. And we have another one right up here under master loaded game. Now go ahead and jump back down to the RPC loaded game scene. Add player management.instance add player stats photonPlayer. Make sure you use the parameter version, so the lowercase one. Now we need something that's going to interact with the player management that is going to call the modify health method, which in return will modify a certain player's stats. So let's go back to the editor and go to game object. You should be in your game scene still. 3D object, cube, and let's set its position to 0x, 0y, and 10z. For the size, we'll make it a scale of 5, 20, and 5. It should already come with a box collider. Set that to is trigger. So we're going to call modify health whenever a player passes through this. So let's make the script. On your scripts folder, right click, create script. We'll call it toxic area and open the script up. So the only thing we really need here is the on trigger action. So erase the start and update and do private void on trigger enter collider other. And like all triggers, whenever you pass through it, the on trigger enter will be called. So whenever you pass through a trigger on a client or master or whatever individual might be doing it, it actually gets called on the client and the master. So the client and the server, in other words. We only want to manage it on the server end because we don't really need the client managing what happens on the trigger. We want the server to do all the work. So we're going to do if not photon network master client or is master client return. And now we need to try to get the photon view component from the object that hit the trigger. And if it needs to sync up with the server, it should have a photon view component. So we're going to do photon view equals other dot get component photon view. And you need to check if photon view is null because if it was an object that's not synced up with the server, there is a chance it will be null. So we're going to do if photon view is not null, make sure you use the lowercase one, player management dot instance dot modify health photon view dot owner, which will pass in the photon player that owns that photon view, and the amount of health we're going to subtract, and we'll just say negative 10, because we're going to be subtracting 10 health. If you wanted to add 10 health, you would just put in 10. Save your script. So now that we have something to call the modify health, we need to populate it. So go back to player management and jump inside your modify health method. And the first thing we need to do is find the player stats that we're going to be modifying. So we're going to do int index equals player stats dot find index, just like before. X equals greater than x dot photon player equals photon player, just like the line we have up above. And also like above, we're going to do if index does not equal -1, meaning if it was found, we're going to do player stats equals player stats index. You don't really have to do this. You could just call it directly from the array, but I think it's a little more organized, so I generally do that. And then all we have to do is player stats dot health plus equals value, and that will add or subtract whatever value we're passing in. So the changes are now saved on the server at this point, but we have to update them to the client as well. And we're going to do that work under the player network script. You could put it really wherever you want ultimately, but just to keep things together and rather simple, we're just going to do it here. So jump into your player network, and let's go just above RPC create player, add a couple lines, and we're going to add public void new health photon player, which is the player's health that we just modified on the server. And we're going to do int health, which will represent the new health. And now we need to use our photon view to broadcast this to the player which we just manipulated. So RPC new health photon player and health. So now we need to make the RPC method, which we just put above. So I'm going to do private void RPC new health, and it's going to expect only the integer health because that's all we're passing in, of course. And this does need to be pun RPC so that it can be called across the network. And we're going to do a check where if health is less than or equal to 0, we are going to destroy the player. So we need a reference to that player or to the object that we're going to destroy. So go up to the very top and let's add private player movement. We'll call it current, let's just say current player. So you have private player movement and it's called current player. So go ahead and jump back down all the way to the bottom where we have RPC create player. Right now we're just creating it, but we're not actually assigning it to anything. So we need to assign it to a variable so that we can store it. So I'm going to do game object obj equals photon network instantiate, so on. And now we need to pull the component from it, the player movement component. So we're going to do current player equals ob dot get component player movement. So now whenever a player is spawned or RPC create player is called, current player should be populated with the script player movement from that prefab. And save all your scripts if you haven't been doing so already. Now jump back up to the RPC new health and do if current player equals null return because we only want to perform the destroy operation if there is an object to destroy. And then add if health is less than or equal to 0, Photon network dot destroy current player. Current player dot game object. So that will call a network destroy, which means it will destroy that object and it will be seen as destroyed across all clients, including the master, the owning client, and anyone else connected. So now we just need to call the new health method, and we will be doing that under player management, because when health is modified we need to call new health. So we're going to do player network dot instance dot new health, and we're going to pass in the Photon player parameter from above and the amount of new health, which would be player stats dot health, and save. So a quick rundown of what we've done so far is whenever a player joins the game scene, they're added to a list with a player stats, which holds their Photon player and a default health of 30. And then whenever they enter that toxic area, which is just a cube, we will subtract 10 health from the player every time, which will call the modify health, because if you go over to toxic area, it just calls the modify health method under player management, which will find the player stats for that player, reduce their health, and then it will call new health on player network, which will relay the new health for that player across the network to the owning player. And if the health is at or below 0, it will destroy the player object. And I believe the only thing we have to do now is just add our scripts to our scene objects. So go back to Unity. Under cube, I'm going to rename cube to toxic area, just so it's kind of easier to understand. And then under add component, add the toxic area script, and then go to your player management object in the hierarchy, and of course add the player management script. And save your scene, and go back to the main scene. We have to go to our prefabs under the resources folder, select new player, and we need to add a rigid body. If you don't have a rigid body, the on trigger enter will not fire. So go ahead and add a rigid body and turn off use gravity. Okay, now I think we're okay to build. So go ahead and go to File, Build and Run. Like always, we're going to open up the editor version as well. We're going to make a room and join it and then start the match. Oh, well, that's not good. Okay, so let's for now set them to is chromatic so that that doesn't happen, and then build and run again. Make sure you close out your executable before trying to build. Okay, so our cubes did not fly into space this time. That's good. They are there. The big toxic area is also gray, so they're kind of hard to see, but they are both there. So we start off with 30 health. Every time we pass through it, it removes 10 health. So on the third pass, we should be killed or removed from the game. So that's 2, and that's 3. So that player is gone. You can see he's gone on both screens. This guy's still here. See 1, 2. Can't quite get it. There we go, 3. Okay, so they both removed from the game on 3. It appears to be working. Go ahead and close out of your executable and stop the editor. So at this point, we know the code is working. Everything seems to be okay. I just want to demonstrate that the anti-hack is actually working server side, and that the client cannot manipulate their health on their end and have it affect the game. So to do that, I'm going to open up my player movement script. And up top, I'm going to add a public float and call it health. And all I'm going to do is assign the health value to what the server is passing into the client. And I'm making it public so that one, I can assign it from anywhere, and two, so you can see it in the inspector. So we assign we check the health under the player network. And it's down under the RPC new health is where we check if health is at or below 0, destroy the object. Let's put else. So if the object is not being destroyed, we're going to do current player dot health equals the parameter health, so lowercase 1. So we're just assigning the current player script, which is actually a reference to our player movement, if you recall and look up above right here. And we're just assigning the health variable on that. So save your changes and go back to the engine. Let's go ahead and rebuild it. And this time I'm going to set the executable as the master client, or the server will pretend, and I'm going to use the editor as the regular client. So that means create the game on the executable so that it is host/master client, join it in the editor, and of course start in the executable. Alright, so I'm going to drop down my game here in the hierarchy, and by default the one in the window here should be the top one. Just to confirm, select the top one and then rotate left and right, and you'll see the rotation change. If it does not, select the other one and you should see it change. Also, if you look down, you'll see that health equals 0. That's because we haven't set the health at the start of the match. We only set it when it changes. If you want that to be displayed at the start, you will of course have to pass in the default value somewhere in your code. So let's go ahead and pass through once. So that set our health to 20, because if you remember, we started at 30, we subtracted 10, it's now 20. But if you were a hacker, let's say you access this variable or a bit of data in memory, and you change that to like 400, because you're not going to die. There's no way. So then you're going to go back through it, but if you look, it dropped it back down to 10. So your change had no effect. Let's put it back up to 500 and go right through it again. Yeah, you're still dead. So the anti-hack is clearly working, only the server has the power to manipulate the health value, and that's what you want to prevent people from hacking. And you can do that with anything. You can store like cooldown times. So like if a player uses an ability, for example, you set the time when they use that ability, and before they're allowed to use it again, they should check with the server, just like we check the health, to see if enough time has passed until they can use it again. Now there is potentially a downside to setting up your game this way. With the host controlling all of the data, sensitive data that comes in and out, if the host leaves the game, your project is essentially broken. The host had all the information, they were the only one with the information, so now all the information about players, whether it be their health, cooldowns, location, all that could be lost when the host leaves the game. The way to resolve that is, instead of just updating the information on the host, you would actually update it across all clients. So for example, instead of only sending the data if it's the master client, you would comment out this line, and you would have to add another check on this line right here. Not only would you want to check if Photon view is null, but you would want to make sure that the owning player is the person that hit the collider. So you do if Photon view dot is mine, because if you remember, on trigger enter will still be called on server and client, and you don't want this being called twice. So you want to make sure it's only called by the client hitting the trigger. And then instead of going through all the trouble of modifying the health against the player stats variables, you would just modify it locally. So for example, I would do like player movement dot health minus equals 10. And this is going to give me an error because I'm trying to modify the class itself rather than an instance of the class, but I'm just trying to provide you with an example. So once you modify the health under the player movement script, you would just add it to the stream like anything else. So you do stream.sendNext health, and then to get the health, you would do health equals int stream dot receive next, like you would do with any of the other variables. That's pretty much it. That is definitely a much easier way to do it. If you're kind of unfamiliar with setting up the server authority, you might want to just try it this way. Yeah, it does expose your game, but it'll speed up development, and the more you can move on with the other stuff, the quicker you'll get the overall hang of things, and then you can head back to it later if you want. And that's it when it comes to networking with Photon. You can go about sending data across a network a variety of ways, but you're most likely only going to be using on Photon serialized view and the RPC technique as well. How you handle whether the player shoots other players, whether they how fast they're moving and their health, that all depends on how secure you want to make your game. There's probably a lot you'll still run into and that you will have to learn along the way. If you want to drop any questions in my channel, I'll definitely try to answer them, but please keep in mind I do get a lot of requests. I usually get about 10 or 20 a day, so I won't necessarily be able to get back to you. In addition, if it's not about Photon directly, there's a good chance I'm simply not going to answer. I try to stay on topic so that I can help more people quickly and so that I have time to make other videos. If you have any requests, definitely feel free to leave a comment on my channel, and I'll see what I can do. And thanks for watching the series all the way through as well.